Hi, everyone. Could we take our seats? We're ready to begin again. Okay, let me begin by thanking our earlier speakers for their welcoming remarks and adding my welcome to the Sanders Institute gathering. We began tonight with an inspiring grounding ceremony from Vermont Truth and Reconciliation Commissioner Melody Mackin of the Elnu Abnaki Band. And thank you for that, Melody. It was very inspiring and thought-provoking. I learned so much as I traveled the country with Bernie about how important it is to have Indigenous leaders part of our events. Chief Brenda Gagne of the Abnaki Nation of Missisquoi will be joining us and will be talking about values, community, and civil discourse on Sunday. Let me also thank Mayor Emma Mulvaney Stanek and Vermont State Treasurer Mike Piechek and Vermont Lieutenant Governor David Zuckerman for their very thoughtful speeches that really, grounds us here in Vermont. And the issues that they raised are not ones that are only in our state. They're all over this country, and they're things that we have to wrestle with as city leaders, as state leaders, as national leaders. So we thank them for that. We'll be hearing from other Vermont elected officials over the weekend, including Burlington City Councilor Milo Grant, Attorney General Charity Clark, and my husband, our Senator, Bernie Sanders. Over the next few days, leaders from a full spectrum of experience and expertise will lead seminars on climate, healthcare, economics, journalism, AI, and more. We'll be hearing from top officials from the executive branch of government. The chief of the White House Initiative on Women's Health Research will be sharing the plans to research the illnesses that uniquely, predominantly, or differently affect women. And that's a new initiative that is very well worth looking into. The Deputy Policy Director of HUD, of the Department of Housing and Urban Development, will be sharing some plans for a private project. They're working with other people here today, reimagining how we can have our housing bureaucracy work much more effectively. It couldn't work less effectively. The Chief of Staff of the Federal Trade Commission will be discussing AI, surveillance, and data privacy. We'll be hearing from dozens of executive directors of national organizations that are advocating for healthcare, housing, the environment, social security, patients' rights, and the public interest. Many of them have contributed to making this event happen. The Healthy Housing Foundation is the presenting sponsor of this gathering. Thank you. We could not have done it without you. Other organizations, yes, Michael. Other organizations have sponsored panels and suggested content for this gathering. Social Security Works, Friends of the Earth, the Sierra Club, Our Revolution, Next Gen, Working Families, the Mary Haas Foundation, and Ben & Jerry's. Thank you. Your support and your leadership, both here and out in the world, is greatly appreciated. We'll also be hearing from physicians, economists, journalists, filmmakers, authors, academics, and a variety of community leaders. 45 speakers in all, so it would take too long to preview them all, but you should stay and listen and learn. That's what I intend to do this weekend. And I don't have time to acknowledge the exceptional work being done by all of you who are in the audience. But I do want to thank our small Sanders Institute team because it is very small. There's 2 staff and I'm a volunteer. So I want to thank our executive director, Dave Driscoll, and our communications director, Shana Fromm. Over the next few days, we'll explore many things that how they can be improved. We'll discuss how we can strengthen behavioral health through effective implementation. We'll address the importance of healthcare price transparency. We'll hear the latest information about climate change and how we can change the momentum. We'll ponder the possibilities of independent journalism affecting real change. We'll see how art can make a difference with 3 great examples of issue-oriented, compelling films. And we'll hear innovative approaches to making housing more accessible and affordable. If you didn't already know, as you can see, our gatherings convene leading professionals from various fields together, allowing them to break out of the silos that too often separate policymakers. For the first time this year, we have hosted events on both coasts. The first was held earlier in Los Angeles and was focused on the homelessness and housing insecurity epidemic. The experience of a growing number of communities, including our own, made this a timely, thought-provoking, and relevant discussion. We'll continue that discussion in Burlington with some panels on this issue. This gathering in Vermont will be a broader discussion. The core intent is to go beyond analysis and statistics to explore innovative solutions, share replicable successes, and develop lasting networks. Bold ideas, civil discourse, and actionable solutions to address some of our nation's most pressing issues are the hallmarks of the Sanders Institute gatherings. I am very grateful that you are here with us tonight and that you are able to help us address many of the important issues facing our nation and to shape a transformational vision for the future. Thank you very much. And now I have the honor of introducing 2 of the Sanders Institute Fellows who have been very active right since the inception of the Institute. Bill McKibben, an environmentalist, author, educator, founder of 350.org and Third Act, and Ben Jealous, former chair of the NAACP and current executive director of the Sierra Club. Please welcome Bill and Ben to the stage.
Well, Jane, thank you. And you can tell it's a good progressive gathering because the after dinner talk is about the end of the world, you know. It's a real pleasure just to welcome any Flatlanders who've made it here to Vermont. You've come at the most beautiful part of the whole spring lilac season. Could not be more beautiful. And, you know, this small state was the first state to outlaw slavery, the first state to legalize same-sex unions, and as of last night, the first state to be sending a bill off to Exxon and Chevron for all the damage that they've caused to the climate. So many thanks to all the people who made that happen. There's some state senators and representatives in the room, and Mike Pichiak is going to be the guy who has to figure out how to get it done. So it'll be fun to watch him taking on Houston in a big way. It's also so much fun to be here at Sanders Institute, Jane, and to be with all the people who have been such a part of this movement for so long and bring back so many memories. It should just be, I'll take it upon myself as Vermonter to just say one of the other great pieces of news is the last few weeks is the news that our senior senator has decided he's willing to do it for another 6 years. So I'm not going to confidently predict the outcome of the national race, but I'm willing to put money with anyone who'd like about the outcome of our Senate race in Vermont later this year. Ben and I are going to talk about the climate crisis. There's other people who are going to be talking about it this weekend in much more detailed terms. Tomorrow there's a great panel with Eric and Joe and Jamie, I think, and Reverend Yearwood talking particularly about fossil fuel subsidies, a huge part of this. Don't miss it. You can tell the environmentalists in the room because we're the ones wearing baseball caps. And the reason for that, I think, in the end is we all follow in Rev's fashion footsteps. So
we really don't.
But it's good to be here, even though half the news that we have to bring you is really about as terrible as news could be. I mean, we are watching in real time right now the destruction of the planet's climate system, not happening over decades or over centuries, but happening over months. Right now, yesterday, New Delhi, the second largest city in the world with 35 million people, had a temperature of 124 or 125 degrees. That's at the absolute edge. And I've spent a lot of time in New Delhi. Most people are not getting through that with air conditioning or anything else. They're suffering in the deepest possible way. Right now, the sea surface temperature in the Atlantic is 2 or 3 degrees higher than we've ever seen it before. If we're not unbelievably lucky, this could be the hurricane season to end all. On and on and on and on. And at the exact same moment that the planet is physically starting to disintegrate in precisely the way that scientists 30 years ago told us it would, in exact same moment, as if kind of scripted by Hollywood, we're also seeing finally the sudden spike in the only antidote we have at scale to deal with this, the application of renewable energy around the world. And that's exciting in a remarkable way. Last summer, just as scientists were telling us that it was the hottest week in the last 125,000 years, that same week was the week that the engineers told us that for the first time, human beings were now installing more than 1 gigawatt's worth of solar panels every single day on this planet. That's a nuclear power plant's worth of solar panels. So we are right at the moment when one or the other of these trends is going to cancel out, there's going to do something about the other one. Our job, I think, is to make sure that we figure out how to dramatically accelerate that second trend so that we have some hope of catching up with the physics of climate change before it does in everything that we care about on this planet. So for me, that's the context of the moment that we're in.
Well, you know, Bill, you used one of the favorite words in my childhood, which was flatlander. This year, for the Jealous family, it's the 400th year that we've been in New England. I was the first son born outside of New England in 350 years, my dad's side of the family. The Jealouses added our funny name to our old family of Willards and Dodges and Choates. We may be cousins, you go back far enough. And apprentice wool manufacturing manager, apprentice wool mill manager came through Ellis Island in the 1880s. And our family operated woolen mills on the coast of Maine down into New Hampshire and Massachusetts for a century. We used to make socks for Bean. And I mention that because it's not a big deal that our family doesn't manufacture anymore. What's a really big deal in this country is we don't do much manufacturing, period, anymore. One of the reasons why I love this room of people, one of the reasons why I will always run wherever Jane Sanders tells me to be, if I can be there, is because as much as we wanted to see Bernie president in 2016, what really united all of us was seeing an understanding that the victory was shifting the policies. And just the way that I'm sure the fossil fuel industry laughed last week when the End Polluter Welfare Bill was introduced, They laughed at us when we said, we got to move beyond NAFTA. And here we are, and America is moving beyond NAFTA, and thank God. We are opening up factories again, and increasingly for this industry, for renewables, for the semiconductors that are needed to twice as many in each EV. They're being produced right here in the Burlington area, where one of the biggest semiconductor producers is. And we at Sierra Club and our team over there is at the table, Harry and Mahi are very much working with that industry to make sure that they do the R&D needed so we don't get more Superfund sites out of semiconductors. But what we do know is that America's divide, what is even more depressing than where we are in climate, is where we are politically, where we are in climate. And you got to ask yourself, well, how do we overcome one without overcoming the other? Well, honestly, the seeds to overcoming the division in America lies in the factories we are building for renewables, for batteries, for semiconductors. Why? Because since NAFTA passed, 65,000 American factories have been shut down. Most Americans now live in the same address. That address is, I live where there used to be a factory. And when it shut down, what shot up was suicide, despair, poverty, meth, opiates, and the list goes on. And every time we open up or expand an existing factory, in order to hasten the day when America has true energy independence, when we're beyond coal and we're beyond LNG, we're beyond nuclear, when we are using the cheapest and most resilient forms of energy, solar, wind, and batteries. Those factories are leading us out of darkness. And let me explain, just to tell you a little story about something I witnessed recently. I was down in maybe the most hopeless place in American politics, which is Representative, I always block her name, ends in green. Her, in Georgia. The one who's just nuts. Trump's nuts congresswoman. Dalton, Georgia. And what will soon be not just the largest solar panel production facility in the Western Hemisphere, but the only one outside of China that produces everything soup to nuts, ingot to panel. And the only question with China right now is, do they control 85%? In politics if we also lost Detroit and not all of the other politics that we've lost and what's happened to American politics since NAFTA. And so with those stakes down in Dalton, Georgia, touring the factory and almost miss about 50 images on the wall. They were drawn and painted by children, 5 to 17 years old. And I backed up and I said, what was that? And they said, those are the paintings from the Earth Day competition last year. It was amongst the children of the workers at the factory. We asked them to portray their parents, how they see their parents working at this factory where we make solar panels. They portrayed them as heroes in maybe arguably the most conservative congressional district in America, Ms. Green's district. The children of that district of every color, many of them children of parents who used to work at the rug factory, portrayed their parents as heroes saving the planet. And the kids in that district get that we need solar panels, get that we got to work together to save this planet. There's reason to be hopeful. And yet we have to, as a community of folks who have helped hasten the end of globalism, and help America understand that not do we just not do we only need an economy that will lift all boats again, one that's not rigged. But the only way to do that is to reconnect the design engine that is America to actually building here. And real talk, from my 75-year-old uncle who works in a lumber yard in southern Maine and does not believe he will ever be able to retire, to my radical niece at Barnard, there's no one in the family who would ever want to replace dependence on foreign oil with dependence on Chinese solar panels. And we have been fighting the Sierra Club for energy independence in America for decades. And we're very clear, we only get energy independence with a robust supply chain. And that's why I'm so grateful for everybody in this room and for Senator Sanders and for Mrs. Sanders, because the American people deserve an economy that lifts all boats, and we don't honestly get to solve climate change until we narrow the partisanship in this country, till we get back to doing things together again, at least agreeing there are common problems to solve. And I think the best hope we have is the one thing that me and Governor Kemp, who can agree on nothing, can agree on, which is we need more solar panel factories in Georgia, and we need more factories across this country, building the very products that guarantee us a better deal on power, energy independence, and ultimately, and will deliver on what America must do to stop climate change.
Absolutely. And I think it's important, given the context, to trace the politics of how we got the IRA, which is the most, the first time that that the Congress and the American federal government has ever recognized climate change and tried to do anything about it. Since we've got Lake Champlain at our back, I remember very well the day in 2016 when I got to help introduce Bernie when he announced his first run for president. And in the next 6 weeks, he transformed American politics by identifying the fact, by bringing out the fact that there were millions of people in this country who weren't part of the kind of neoliberal consensus about what we were supposed to do. And making climate a big part of that was important, and equally important in 2020 when consolidating that group. When the time came to back the Biden administration, he did it by empowering a few people, Varshini Prakash, AOC, others, to sit down with the Biden people and hammer out that agreement about what we were then calling Build Back Better. That's Bernie policy, then run through the, mansion sausage making, equipment. But that's why we have that, because people in this room managed to build that movement that he led, and very, very, very politically skillfully did the job of turning it into policy. Not the job of turning it into, his own narcissistic adulation or anything else, but turning it into the policy that we desperately, desperately needed, and that now gives us some chance at healing some of those divisions and at healing the extraordinary, extraordinary physical crisis that we face because of the climate. And that's a, lesson worth bearing in mind as we approach this next election. I now spend my time volunteering to help, organize old people like me in this work. And we've got, after 2 years, we've got 80 or 90,000 volunteers at Third Act ready to go, making phone calls and things. And one of the things that distinguishes them, and one of the things that actually makes it fun to organize older people, is that they are heavily pragmatic. Understand that we have very little time to make very big change, and So we, we're in a unbelievably difficult moment, but also an unbelievably transcendent one in certain ways. In the last 5 or 6 years, China, but everywhere else, the price of solar power and wind power and batteries has dropped 80, 90%. We live on a planet where the cheapest way to produce energy is to point a sheet of glass at the sun. That is unbelievably liberating for everybody on this earth, except the people who own huge reserves of coal and gas and oil, for whom it is an absolutely mortal and existential threat. And that's why they're all rallying around. That's why they were having that meeting in Washington the other day where Donald Trump explained that he'd happily sell the planet for $1 billion. It was a kind of Austin Powers moment, It's like $1 billion, that's,
I thought he was going to sell it for bail.
That's what he'd use it for. But that's one of the, maybe the deepest political tension running through the world right now between people who have, a tiny number of people who have everything to lose and the rest of the world that has everything to gain by what's an incredibly exciting possibility. I mean, look, human beings have been setting things on fire for several 100,000 years. That's who we've been. Darwin said that fire and language were the two things that set human beings apart. And it was all good, I mean, we learned to cook food. That's how we got the big brain. We had fire so we could keep ourselves warm. Nobody was living in Vermont before there was fire. The anthropologists even say that standing around the campfire for eons was one of the things that produced the social bonds that mark our, it was a kind of proto-Zoom, and then we had learned to control the combustion of oil and gas and coal, and that gave us modernity. It gave us the world that we know. But now the cost is too high. The climate crisis, the fact that 1 death in 5 on this planet, 9 million people a year die from breathing the combustion byproducts of fossil fuel. And there's hundreds of thousands of cases of childhood asthma in this country, and we know who gets to live next to highways and refineries and petrochemical plants and whatever. And the fact that when you depend on a resource like coal or gas or oil that's only available in a few places, the people who sit on top of those places get too much power. And they use them, well, the Koch brothers are our biggest oil and gas barons. They use their winnings to degrade and deform our democracy. Vladimir Putin is Europe's biggest oil and gas baron. He used his to launch a land war in Europe in the 21st century. How nice would it be to live in a world where we did not depend on that, where the thing that is available to everyone, every place, sun and wind, was the thing that ran our lives, and we can do it. The one place that's made a really serious effort, California, this spring has been producing day after day 140% of the electricity that it needs from sun and wind and hydro. That means that when the sun goes down at night in California at the moment, the biggest source of supply to the grid is batteries. Not nuclear plants, not gas plants, batteries. There wasn't a battery on the grid in California 5 years ago. The speed with which we could do this, if we set our minds to it, is almost as fast as the speed at which the planet is crashing. So that's the moment. But it's not just a depressing moment. It's, in so many ways, an inspiring one. I mean, which we could use. I mean, it's terrible to think of the number of young people who definitely suffer from climate anxiety, because why would you not, But there's a chance to have some of the same kind of romance and adventure that those of us who grew up in the 60s watching the space program got to see. In this case, it's not putting two guys on a different planet. It's bringing a planet down to Earth to let us run this beautiful place in a way that works for everyone. So this could be the most exciting task that humans have ever undertaken. We just have to break the power of the fossil fuel industry and build out the power that Ben was describing, that power of people with real connection to real things that let us make change now.
Well, you know, I mean, and can we just get another round of applause for Bill McKibben? I mean, we have literally one of the best organizers in the country. And don't underestimate the strategy of Third Act. Now, I was taught Politics 101 by Charles V. Hamilton. He was the other guy on Black Power after Stokely Carmichael. And it was the year after he helped provide vision for Doug Wilder's victory, David Dinkins' victory, and Harold Washington's victory. And Professor Hamilton would say, never forget, at any point in American history, the activists come from two generations, disproportionately. Those around and below university age, and those around and above retirement age. Because they have two things in common. They both perceive themselves as having disposable time. And they're both very eager to change the world. The younger ones are about to inherit it, want the rules better before they got to run it. And the older ones are about to depart it and want to define their legacy. And they say, we take the elders for granted at our own peril because there are more of them, they have more disposable income, and they vote more often. So if you see Bill McKibben in some corner doing something that somebody thinks is eccentric, no, he's a genius, and you probably should be following him. As Bill talks about the better world we can create, let us, up here in the kind of hardy land of the Green Mountains and the White Mountains, and moose. Moose will mess up your car. It's prom time. In Maine, they don't have the drunk driving car. They have the moose car at prom time. Remember that solar and wind and batteries are not just the cheapest form of energy. They are the most resilient. And that really only works, again, with a robust supply chain, because we saw during COVID what happens when Americans no longer make enough toilet paper or masks or ventilators. We don't want to be there when we're heading towards 25% of the country being powered with sun, and not many years from now. But as we think about a world beyond fossil fuels, let us also imagine a world with fewer dumb wars. Because it's hard to separate, certainly in my lifetime, the dumb wars from the fossil fuel industry. And that also shows you what we're up against and why it's so important that we fight courageously and with vision, as Senator Sanders and a whole host of Democrats have done. I mean, it just kind of hit me the other day, like, here is the Green New Deal, right? That's what the IRA is. Let's also be clear that there is consensus to be forged across party lines, typically at the state level and the local level, where people are more sane and more rooted in the real world. We all live in two worlds. There's this world, right, where you don't even want to go to Thanksgiving on social media, like, oh God. And then there's this world where when our feet are in the same place, we're around the campfire at the same time, all of a sudden you realize, no, I actually like that cousin, even though social media, they drive me nuts. And in that world, we're actually able to pass bills and get things done at the state capitol in a bipartisan way again and again and again. And not only is there increasing consensus around building the industry that we need to supply the renewables for true energy independence and getting beyond fossil fuels, but there's always been consensus about saving wild places. That's greater than there is on most issues. And we will have to do both. This is the Sierra Club's new campaign is Tree Hugger. We decided to take the word back, and we ran into the noble origins of it, which is women in India hugging trees. That's where it comes into language. They're called the clingers in Hindi, to protect them from industry. It's what got me into this movement when I was young, and they were trying to clear-cut redwoods in California, where my parents moved because their marriage was against the law in Maryland and not socially acceptable in Maine. And the reality is that we are going to have to protect a lot more land if we're going to win at this game. And we're not just living through a climate crisis. We're looking at Eric Pica from Friends of the Earth. We're also living through an extinction crisis. And we're losing more species every year right now than they did when the dinosaurs were made extinct. And so the beauty of it, right, is that if we lean into this movement, if we proceed with hope, if we answer our children's anxiety, like my son who's reading Harry Potter because he didn't want to listen to this talk again, over in the green room, kid, smart child. But part of what led me back into this movement, having started the first high school chapter of something called the Student Environmental Action Coalition when I was a kid, was my son, who's now about to be 12 on the 4th of July, at age 9 said to me, "Dad, you know I don't want to talk about how kids are made, but should I plan on having one when I'm old enough?" And that was how his climate anxiety first appeared. And what I said to my son was, "You know, son, when I was a kid, we thought, not only did we think humanity was going to go extinct because of nuclear war, and humanity pulled itself back from the brink at exactly the right time because of the great movements around this world, but son, we also thought that the bald eagle was going to go extinct, and maybe osprey with him." And he looked at me and he said, "Well, you know, in our backyard, Dad, bald eagles, we live in a bird sanctuary in the Chesapeake Bay." He said, "Bald eagles are like seagulls and osprey are like pigeons." I said, "That's exactly right, son." Because the environmentalist movement figured out how to build consensus against DDT so that their chicks could get out of their eggs. We have every reason to proceed with optimism. In fact, it's the only way to build this movement. One of the reasons why people didn't follow Chicken Little, it wasn't because Chicken Little was wrong, it's because Chicken Little was depressing. And the reality is that the black church has a lot of wisdom. You know, we say that we claim the victory in advance and then we go make it real. Well, there's only one way to go on this issue, guys. We have to win or we go extinct. And we know that humanity has a pattern of figuring out how not to go extinct. And we know that if we lean into this movement now, if we do what we need to do on energy, things will get radically better. Streams get cleaner. Heart attacks go way down. Our Beyond Coal campaign has already reduced the number of heart attacks. By next year, we will celebrate 100,000 heart attacks prevented and 1 million asthma attacks prevented. And that's only with 2/3 of the nation's coal-fired power plants shut down. Imagine when we have none. All that mercury that's just no longer in the air. It's not in the streams. What it means for people who would rather subsist on fish as things get radically cleaner. And if we do what we need to do on energy, again, the dumb wars get fewer and fewer. And if we do what we need to do on land, a lot of species that we value come back from the brink. This is fundamentally a movement that is about healing our nation, healing our politics, healing our planet, saving all wild things. Who doesn't want to be optimistic about that? And again, one of the reasons why I will always run to this room is because it's full of optimists. I'm looking at Jim Zogby right now, who's carrying a whole lot of pain. Great fighter for the rights of Palestinians forever, longer than I've known him by far. And yet, I know Jim wakes up every day focused on what can I do to make it, whatever we're fighting on, whether it's the issue he's carrying in his heart right now, the war in Gaza, or whether it's any number of issues Jim and I have been on the same side of in civil rights and the environment. He always wakes up with a checklist in his head about what can I do today to make victory come faster. And fundamentally, that's what unites this room. That's what we saw in Senator Sanders when he ran for president, what we see in our friend in the Senate every day. is somebody who's been an organizer his entire life, at least since he was a teenager, and always understood we have one job, and that's to make a better future come faster for real people, because real people don't have time, more often than not, to worry about somebody else's problems, and yet they're all counting on us, who do have a little bit of extra time, to help solve theirs. We can win this fight. We can win this fight because there's a lot of Americans across the political spectrum who want to save wild places for wild things. And we can win this fight because there's a lot of people across the political spectrum who want to see factories come back to their community and their state. And we can win this fight because every kid, as the children of Dalton, Georgia reminded me when I looked at their paintings, starts off green and is in their parents' household saying, no, you're doing the right thing. So let's claim the victory in advance. And let's stay committed and stay united in making it real.
Part of all of this is actually taking those victories when we get them and appreciating them, which is not something that we're always all that good at doing. I may be the wrong person to talk. Vermont is the craft beer capital of the world, but it probably was not a good idea to, drink one beer for every felony conviction last night. But in general, we really do have to take those moments when something happens and claim it. And partly that means in this election, being willing to say how important that IRA was. Was it perfect? Not even close. I mean, the Green New Deal, when the Sunrise Movement brought it forward and, when AOC embraced all that, when Bernie got behind it, the Green New Deal was pretty much perfect, and Build Back Better, which it devolved into, was not so bad, and then the IRA was
what happens in the U.S. Congress?
Was not so great, but it was, in some other sense, remarkable.
Amazing.
For the first time, we're committed to spending serious money in America, in union shops, to make stuff again here, and it's the stuff that we need, more than anything on earth. And, I mean, because, there's always dignity in work, but there's triple dignity, as you point out, in work that produces the things that we actually desperately need on a planet. And that's why it's incredibly exciting to see those things starting to happen. But we've got to actually talk about that enough that people understand it. And truthfully, we don't do it. Certainly the Democratic Party does not a good job of talking about those things in those ways. And we got to be willing to talk about the other thing. And you mentioned this when you're talking about Georgia. One of the things that's really brilliant about the IRA is that the bulk of the money is going to red state America to do this work, which is not something that we're used to anymore in our country, of people being willing to do anything other than support their own supporters. And it's a remarkable possibility for a kind of political healing going forward. One prays that we get another 4 years for it to fully play out, and for it really to begin to pay those kind of dividends. Because the thing that the other side fears most is a country where those divides begin to shrink.
100%.
All they've got is the divide to play off of, And it's one of the things that makes it beautiful to be in Vermont, frankly, because those divides are not as deep, and so we're able to get things done in a slightly different way here than we have in other places. And it's one of the things that I take great pleasure in. And it also upsets all the standard rules because, you know, Vermont is the most rural state in the Union, which should mean a certain set of politics, and it doesn't here because there are other undercutting traditions, things like town meeting, that have left us in a different place. But if we're going to do this, I think you're right. We've assembled as big a crew of people as anger and fear and guilt and sadness will assemble. Those are all utterly legitimate emotions which I feel and endorse. I wrote the first book about climate change. It had the cheerful title, The End of Nature, okay? So I'm not at all a Pollyanna about this, but we've reached we need, as always, a bigger movement to break the power of the fossil fuel industry. And so that also means these other emotions, joy and romance and adventure and possibility and hope. And those things are very, very real. They're more real than they've ever been. And so the place I'm going to end is just where I started. We're not just right now at one of those points where we say this is the most important election in American history, or we're at a turning point for American democracy or something. We're really at a turning point for our history as a species. Continue down one path, and all we've got to look forward to is an endless, horrible regime of somehow trying to respond to ever greater emergencies, ever bigger fires, ever deeper floods, with ever less resources to do it. You can see that already starting to happen. Look at people across this country who no longer can get insurance for their homes. That's one of the most, in a country of homeowners, that's one of the most fundamental expressions of the insecurity that we're now building. So that's the one path. And the other path is this path that we could take as a nation, but also as a world community. Because what you said about war was right, and what Rev's hat says is right. Oil is war. But if we move in this other direction as a planet, it's not that everything gets perfect, that's not one of the possibilities ever, but it's that the tensions around the world begin to, imagine a world where we didn't care about oil and who owned it, and imagine what the change in geopolitics on our planet would be in that world, And we can do it, and we can do it in 5 years. And we have to do it in 5 years because unlike the other political challenges that we deal with, this one comes with a time limit. We've been fighting for national health care in this country as long as I have been alive. And it is an absolutely important, crucial battle, and it's a sin that we don't have it. And every year that we don't have it, people die and go bankrupt, and thank God that Bernie keeps pushing for more, and we're making some progress. But the fact that we didn't do it doesn't mean that when we finally get around, like every other industrialized country in the world, to doing it, it won't be harder because we delayed. But climate change isn't like that. Once you melt the Arctic, nobody's got a plan for how you freeze it back up again, okay? So the scientists have told us that if we don't cut emissions in half by 2030, we have no chance of staying on the timetable that we set in Paris. Those not very aggressive temperature targets will go by the board if we haven't cut emissions in half by 2030, which by my watch is 5 years and 6 months away. We've got no more time to fool around, but we've got everything we need. We have the technology, and it is affordable, and we can do it. We just have to do it. And that means that the people that this room represents, we have to be serious in a way that we've never been serious before. We don't get a second chance on this one, so we have to get it right. And that's all I got, You finish us off.
Yeah, no, so I'll give you some reasons to be optimistic. You know, I mean, in addition to the factories, think for a second about the fact that we are investing $1.5 billion in planting trees in America's cities right now. I just got back from Phoenix, from a park where they're putting up more trees, talking to a young person who said, now I can bring my siblings here to play in the park.
Tell them about the Climate Corps.
The Climate Corps across the country, young people funded by government to get in there and really build on things we started 30 years ago. I remember helping to launch Neighborhood Green Corps, and now it's really at scale, built on the old CCC. Senator Sanders got $7 billion in there for Solar for All, which means that regular working folks are able to afford to put panels on their roofs and not just let solar panels be something for their wealthier neighbors. The Gwich'in, who have worked with Sierra Club for over 75 years to defend the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, just celebrated what felt like an earth-shaking victory when the president said no drilling. It's just not going to happen. We're going to keep it all on the ground. If we simply, let me ask you a question. If you raise your hand if you like going to a state park or a national park. Raise your hand if you like our parks. All right? Now keep your hand raised if you like going there on Labor Day weekend. All right. There's all the argument you need for the average American for why we need to double our parks. And if we double our parks, our 2030 land goals are basically reached. Or we could simply just make permanent the roadless rule in the Tongass Forest, and we'll get mostly there too. In other words, these are all things we can do in the next 5.5 years. GM is about to announce 6 new vehicles. Their Silverado will have a 440-mile battery. First person I'm calling about that is my uncle up in Maine who said 320 on my Ford Lightning wasn't enough for him. And they will make one that'll be the cheapest vehicle on the planet that goes over 300 miles. There is a Moore's law right now with solar panels. They are getting more and more powerful. There is a Moore's law with batteries right now. They are getting more and more powerful, and we're even developing wind turbines that kill fewer and fewer birds. There's all kinds of reasons to be optimistic. And again, as a guy who was born a bridge from the white community, the black community, between Maine and Baltimore, East Coast and West Coast ultimately, let me tell you this. When most people say environmentalist, they think of a white person. The white community is the least environmentalist of any racial group in the United States.
By far.
Latinos are number 1, blacks are number 2, Asian Americans not far behind, and I'm assuming Native Americans are off the charts. We don't poll them enough. So, if you're ever a white environmentalist and you're feeling like I need more allies,
They're there.
just go to the other part of town. They're everywhere. We've got this, y'all. We got to stay up. We got to fight with hope. We wallow in anxiety. We wallow in narratives about woe is me. We kill our movement. But we claim the victory in advance, and we take a moment to celebrate all the victories along the way, which right now, the Biden administration, we are winning major victories at a pretty fast clip. We might just be able to build a bigger movement fast enough to win by 2030. And if you doubt if that's possible, consider that when Bill's book came out, we were hoping to keep the world under 4 degrees by now. And now we're fighting to keep it under 2. We've already won half the battle. We can do this. God bless each of you.
Thank you, sir.
Ben, Bill, thank you for that hopeful yet urgent message with specific solutions in mind as well. I mean, that was, we'll just all have to think about it a lot. And you've given us a good path forward. Thank you. Now it's my job to introduce a man who has been introduced many, many times in many, many ways. And I'm not going to introduce him in the way that he usually is. I mean, I can talk about all the wonderful work that he's done, and I think we'll be hearing about that all through the weekend, because as we talk about the issues, he's there on every one of them. But this is a man, we were talking the other day about meeting back when he was running for mayor, and I listened to him when he was up on the stage, and I thought, this person embodies everything I believe in. And he still does. He really still does. This is the person that I admire and trust more than anyone in the world. I think there are parts of him that you don't know. I mean, he works really hard. He's completely devoted to his work. He's got, as my daughter who's a yogi says, he's living his dharma. You know, he just basically devotes all his efforts to that. And I'll be honest with you, when we were talking about him running again, to a person, everybody in the family said, oh, selfishly, we were saying, we really want to have more time with you. But all the time we were saying that, we knew that he was going to do it. And we also understood that and supported that. But what you don't know is, as he's gotten older, he's gotten better in many ways. He's found not balance in life, let's get real, but he takes time every single time that he's home to make sure that he sees his children and his grandchildren, that he plays basketball and baseball and ping pong. Ping pong is the new thing. And he's incredible, and he's beating all of us. But anyway, I just want to say that the person that you're being so supportive of as we hear people speak is an incredible human being as well as an incredible public servant. So, my husband, Bernie Sanders.
Yes, that was a unique introduction. Let me thank Jane and David for organizing this event. What they are trying to do, which is enormously important, is in the midst of all of the crises facing our country, bring some of the best minds and activists together. And a few months ago, there was a wonderful event in LA. Some of you were there, focusing on maybe, as I go around the country, one of the dominant issues, and that is the housing crisis, and brought some great people together, and doing it here this evening as well. And also, I have to say, on a very personal level, I know many of the people in this room, not everybody. And some of the people here I have worked with for over 50 years. Where's Martha Abbott? Martha here? All right. Martha and I, as members of a third party called the Liberty Union Party, not known by everybody, but a few older people. We used to drive around. We didn't have enough, literally did not have enough money to put gas in the old Volkswagen that Martha had. And Martha and I and others ran for office in the state got 2% of the vote and 1% of the vote. But enjoyed what we were doing, and we knew what we were doing, and that is trying to raise consciousness in the state. And I think we succeeded in doing that. The issues facing our country today are unprecedented in my lifetime. It's like a what do you call that storm? The what? The what? Perfect storm, right. It's all of these things coming together. And, you know, you're looking, and one of the problems is that we don't really talk about the problems because you have a media which is owned by the very same people who would prefer us not to talk about the problems. But you have massive income and wealth inequality, which is, you know, beyond outrage. And I think hearing everybody talk tonight, I've been really impressed by all the folks that I've heard, is we are the wealthiest country in the history of the world. New technology, we heard from Ben and Bill about the new technologies that are developing in wind, solar, batteries. Think about all of the things that could happen. So when we talk about optimistic, we have the right to talk about a world without poverty, a world in which we, in fact, tackle and address the climate crisis, a world in which every man, woman, and child has a decent standard of living. That is not utopian dreaming. That is a realistic opportunity for us to achieve. But right now, what you have is, in this country, a religion of greed. It's not the Sermon on the Mount. What it is, hey, I only have $10 billion. I need more. And how can I get more tax breaks? How can I get more deregulation? How can I put more money into campaigns to elect people who will support my greed? We have, as speakers before me have mentioned, not only this massive income and wealth inequality, we have a corrupt political system. And it's out there for everybody to see. No one's hiding anymore. It's not just Trump who says, give me $1 billion from the oil industry. There will be a huge, unbelievable amount of money coming into this campaign from super PACs. Billionaires who will spend hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars as a good investment to pursue their goals, to defeat their opponents, and to gain victories for their supporters. We are living at a time when working class people are increasingly doubtful about the benefits of democracy. Democracy is not just going every 2 or 4 years to vote. They do that in Russia. They did that in the Soviet Union. Democracy doesn't mean anything if you don't believe that the people you are voting for are going to do something for you. And a point I think David made or somebody made earlier. It's not just the voter suppression that we're seeing, the overt action trying to keep people of color or young people from voting. Why would anybody vote if they're falling further and further behind and they look at Washington and their state capital and not see anything happening to improve their lives? And that is, in fact, the case. And one of the things that's going on all over this country is that many of our people are falling further and further behind. I want you to hear this one statistic because it is not talked about very often. Think about where we were in 1973. Think about where we are today. Think about the incredible increase in worker productivity. We didn't have, when I became mayor of Burlington in 81, there was not a computer in the office. Not a computer, let alone cell phones and everything else we have computers. Today, that average American worker is making $50 a month less than he or she did 50 years ago in inflation accounted for dollars. So if you're that average worker and your job went to China or to Mexico, you're making $15 an hour, you can't afford health care, you can't afford housing, can't afford to send your kid to college, can't afford child care, democracy is not working for you. And those people who come and say, we don't need all this political bullshit anymore, I'm going to do something. Well, it's an attempt, it's an appealing message. And we're seeing that increasingly not only in this country, but all over the world. So when we talk about the dangers that we face in losing our democracy, understand that's not some abstract idea. If government cannot deliver for people, cannot improve their standard of living, cannot make life better for their kids than for them, we can understand why they're giving up on democracy. We have a health care system today, mentioned earlier, totally broken and dysfunctional. We spend twice as much as any other country. Our longevity, how long we live, substantially lower than many other countries. And here's another fact that we don't even talk about. If you are working class or low income in this country, you're going to live 10 years shorter than upper income people. So our whole country is behind other countries like Japan and many other countries. But then in our own country, the class divide is rather extraordinary. We're living in a moment where after decades of struggle, women are now being forced back into second-class citizenship, giving up control over their own bodies. Time in this country, not so many decades ago, we led the world in the percentage of our people who had college degrees, way behind many other countries right now. So we got some problems in front of us, not to mention what Ben and Bill just talked about in the question of whether or not the planet survives. Real issue. So what do we do? Well, I wish I had a magical answer, and my wife tells me I can't talk about politics because this is a nonprofit 501c3, so we don't want to do anything to endanger that. But what I do believe, and I know, Ben and Bill were talking about reasons to be optimistic, and I have many reasons, and I have been, when you run for president and you go to every single state in America, as I did, you see a whole lot. And I got to tell you truthfully, there are so many extraordinarily wonderful, wonderful people that Jane and I got people here work with me on various campaigns, and I thank them all, that we have all seen all over this country. And I don't know if Misty Rebick here, Misty, you here now? Where's Misty? Misty is my chief of staff now in Washington. She was my campaign manager in Iowa, where I spent half my life. And won, but that's all right, embarrassing. But the lesson that I learned there, as I have in Vermont, is we did meeting after meeting after meeting, sometimes 2 or 3 a day, 7 days a week. And people came out, working class people. And one of the greatest political honors that I've ever received is that people who I really did not know, I'd never seen in small towns in Iowa and elsewhere in New Hampshire, in Vermont, were prepared to open up their hearts and talk about what was on their minds. And that was just an extraordinary privilege to know that people were willing to share their feelings. And Misty will tell you, meeting after meeting, people were crying, about can't afford health care, going bankrupt. I mean, I could tell you a million stories of what we heard. And I could tell you, being in California, one evening when the sun was going down, we were in their agricultural Fresno area. And the sun was going down, must have been 5,000 to 10,000 people there in a beautiful farm area. And we had kids in front of us who were Latino and black and white, young people, every color that you can think of, who really had a beautiful vision, have a beautiful vision for the future of our country. And when we talk about optimism, let us not forget that while our young kids are suffering and struggling, they are the most progressive younger generation in the history of our country. And if we're going to save the planet, it's because of the work that they are doing in almost every country on earth, demanding that governments allow them to raise families in a healthy and habitable world. They are there fighting to make sure that they don't drown in student debt, et cetera, that they have the right to go to college or graduate school. So I think where I become optimistic is when you think back on and other speakers have made this point tonight, you think back on the history of this country. You think back, to the Revolutionary War, and those guys were pretty brave. They ended up creating a democracy, the most significant democracy in the modern history of the world. Pretty big deal. They put their lives on the line to do it. You think about 600,000 people dying in the Civil War, people really standing up, putting their lives on the line to end the horror of slavery, did that. You think about the Depression era when 25% of our people were unemployed, and FDR and others transformed the role of the federal government and did some really extraordinary things. You think about World War II. 1941, the United States had to fight a war on two fronts, and it was unprepared to do that. And in 3 or 4 years, the country came together to build the economy that it needed to win both in Europe and in Asia. Extraordinary. So I think the point that you have heard from many speakers today and from Ben and Bill is that things can change in a fairly rapid way. And what I can tell you, is that what you see on television and what you hear from many of the establishment politicians is not where people are at. Working people, there was just a poll that came out. It was kind of a sad poll. I don't know if anyone saw it. They polled young people. And young people were saying, yeah, political leadership in this country is corrupt. They don't care about us. But I think things can change very, very quickly. And I have seen it with my own eyes. I've seen incredible beauty, incredible decency. God almighty, the thoughts come to my mind of the wonderful, it's a thought going back to Iowa. I'll never forget this Latino woman. She was a home health care worker. She went to take care of people every day. She was making like $16 an hour, and she enjoyed her job. And she would take money out of her own pocket. She didn't have any money to help some of her people that she took care of who were worse off than she was. And you see that kind of generosity. Talk to veterans. I'm former chairman of the Veterans Committee. People have put their lives on the line to defend the country. Extraordinary people. And on it goes. So I think we cannot wallow, I think is the word Ben used, in gloom. These are tough times. We have to be honest with the American people as to where we are. These are very tough times. Can we get out of it? I think we can. But as I think everybody up here has said, it's going to be a massive effort to bring our people together from all walks of life. We're seeing the trade union movement growing, winning some major victories, and that is a significant step forward. We're seeing young people stand up in protest against an horrific, unjust war in Gaza, and that's something to be proud of. So we got a lot on our table, and I thank all of you, our brothers and sisters from here in Vermont, from those of you who have come long distances to be with us today. There's a lot to be discussed, a lot of ideas that need to be refined. But at the end of the day, it is on our shoulders to not only save our democracy, but to save this planet for our kids and future generations. And you know what? We can do it. Thank you.
Okay, that's a wrap. We are going to have a group picture, so we want to document this. I take pictures of everything, so bear with me. We're going to be doing this a few times. But if everybody can come up, and then we have a nice group picture of the event. And have a nice night. We're welcome to stay and relax and talk with each other after that. And we have to be out of here by 10. Lights out. Thanks.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. If you could come to the front of the stage and face the stage, please. Get very close together. The photographers are actually going to be on the stage taking pictures of you. They're just going to set up some lights.